I'm here today with AFN Clarke, author and screenwriter. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
So, tell me, how did you first meet Alan Clarke and come to work with him on the film Contact?
At a restaurant in the heart of London after his working partner Nicholas Claxton, a producer who worked for Central Television, called my publishers.
So they just kind of contacted you out of the blue?
No, Contact had just been published, the book, and I'd been all over the television. It was serialized for 5 days in the Daily Mirror. I'd been interviewed on Newsnight and by Michael Parkinson on Breakfast TV. So it was fairly wide publicity going on about it, and it was a pretty controversial book at the time, which of course was something that drew Alan to it immediately. Nothing like controversy.
So did you then approach the BBC immediately to do the film?
No, Alan, the reason that Nicholas and Alan actually contacted me through my publishers was that they were working on a military style project at the time. And they wanted to meld Contact into that somehow and do it. So that's how we got started as an independent production.
So you went straight to the BBC with a screenplay then that you wrote with them?
No, it didn't happen that way. Nicholas contacted David Putnam, who actually, coincidentally, my publisher Tom Rosenthal had also contacted as regards doing a film. David was doing Cal, the Bernard McClafferty film, and he didn't want to do 2 Northern Ireland projects and really didn't want to do another military film. So he suggested that we actually go to Jake Eberts, who was the head of production at Goldcrest.
And so how did that go? Were they the ones that then funded it and ran it into the BBC somehow?
No, again, it was still independent, completely independent. Goldcrest had done a series of films, Chariots of Fire being one of the most famous at the time. Jake liked the whole idea, so he optioned the book film rights and gave us some money to go and do an extended film treatment, screenplay. So we trundled off to France for about 10 days, stayed in a farmhouse, more like a chateau actually, that belonged to some friends of Nicholas's, and had fun and hashed out the whole idea of what we would do for a film, and then came back.
And so I believe at that point though, you got a rude shock.
Yes, everything had changed. Jake Eberts was gone, a new head of production was in, and like all changes that take place, the new guy doesn't want to do the old guy's stuff. So that was the end of that, and we were left stranded, probably about almost the end of the year of 1983, with nowhere to go. Alan had been doing some work with the BBC, obviously off and on over the years. He had done a lot with the BBC. And he was at a meeting with Peter Goodchild, and the idea came up that Peter was doing a BBC series, new drama series for BBC 2 that they were going to call Screen 2. And the first film was going to be aired on January 6, 1985. So that would have been, when Alan met him, it would have been the beginning of '84. There were provisos. So Alan said, well, I've got a project, are you interested? And he talked to him about Contact, the book. And Peter was very enamored with the idea, so basically gave us a deal and said, if you can get it all done, we need to have the whole thing set up, shot, edited, ready for air, within a year. The only problem was Nicholas Claxton couldn't be involved because the BBC wanted their own producer. So we had a golden opportunity sort of presented to us. But the downside, the negative, was that Nicholas couldn't be involved in it. So Alan came to me with the idea, talked to me about it and said, what do you think? It's up to you.
So you had a difficult decision to make at that point.
Essentially, it came down to that old adage, a bird in the hand. What do you go with? But it had the problem that Nicholas couldn't be involved. So, after a while of sort of thinking about it, we had nowhere to go with it. Otherwise, we had no production money to go and make a film. The BBC were offering it, so I took it.
Unfortunately, that is what happens often in the film world, isn't it? That people don't want the independent producers; they want their own.
They want their own. The problem is, I lost a friend, and that was, that was tragic in that sense. But we were off and running.
So I believe that your first screenplay for Contact wasn't that well received by Alan Clarke.
I went off and wrote it, and because this was my first book, my first screenplay. So I just wrote a screenplay based on Contact, Belfast scenes, the lot. Alan said, whoa, wait a minute, we can't do that. We've got limited money, we've got limited shooting time. We can't do a whole Belfast thing with the tanks and all the armoured cars and the Land Rovers and all the logistics required to film in the city. So we distilled it down. But the other thing was that there was a lot of dialogue that I put in, and Alan said, I don't want that. I want the essence of the book. So we started to talk about the book. What is the essence of the book? Why did I write it? Why did I write it the way I wrote it, and so on? And the book is about me. It's about my thoughts, my feelings, my experiences. It was more of a visceral book than a sort of standard biography as such. It was stream of consciousness. And I had called the original manuscript Images, because that's what I saw. I saw a series of images, almost poetic, almost surreal in its reality. And Alan seized on that and went, oh, okay, let's go down that road. And we talked long and hard about it, and just took hold of the script and literally tore it to pieces, and ended up with a virtually dialogue-free film.
Which is quite extraordinary when you think about it. It's not what you expect going to see a movie or going to see a film.
No, but and Contact, the book, isn't what you expect when you read a autobiographical book about being in the army or Northern Ireland. It is completely different. And the book itself was cutting edge when it came out, highly controversial. So why not do a film of the same way? Why not keep that essence and keep that ball rolling? So it had to be a fictional film, a drama, and a work of art. So that's where we went.
So how did you create that sense of realism, which is something that a lot of people have commented on even to today, that the film is so realistic?
Well, it helps with... I was on the film from day one. Spent a lot of time talking to Alan. We talked about the fact that how do we do this with actors and stuff, and we brought on a stunt coordinator, Terry Forrestal, who had just finished doing Killing Fields, another guy called Tip Tipping, who had done or was going to do Hamburger Hill, another big movie. They were both ex-military, Terry ex-21 SAS, and Tip was in the Royal Marines and served in the Falklands. So it was a core of military people saying this is how we can do it. So we can take all these actors and we can train them to be soldiers.
So apparently you created boot camp for the actors in order to really get them into the role.
Oh yeah. Got them up at 6 in the morning. We had this little hotel that we had rented and took it over. It was like a farmhouse that was bed and breakfast, but it had a bunch of rooms, so we had enough of the actors. Built a little assault course behind in the grounds of it. And we had them getting up at 6 in the morning, getting out on parade in uniform, and with their equipment. And we had equipment drills and inspections and so on and so forth, and had them doing exercise, running, getting fit, because they needed to. There was going to be a lot of physical work for them to be doing. And they were put through the mill. They were put through a mini battle school, if you like, and had to learn how to use the equipment, had to learn how to use the guns and the rifles and so on, how to move, what was required, how to wear their equipment. For instance, with Sean Chapman, who played sort of my character in the piece, I set him up. I set his pouches and belt and everything the way I wore them. I showed him how to shrink his berry so it fitted his head properly. Because in South Armagh, most of the time, all my soldiers never wore their berries when we were out in the field. I always wore my berry. Why? I have no idea. It made me a perfect target, but I did. I'd worked hard for my berry. I was going to wear it. So, that was the other thing that Sean did in the film. And if you notice, none of the other actors wore their berries. So it was just Sean.
You had a lot of night shoots, so how did you accomplish that? Because I think you used some technology that you had used in the army.
Yeah, I talked to Alan about using an image intensifying scope. And when we were casting, we were talking about this, and we were talking about it from the very beginning. And I said that we'd use this on video cameras in the army. And essentially, it was a rifle telescopic night sight, big thing, called an IWS. And so I told him about this, and he thought it was infrared. And I said, no, Alan, it's not infrared, it's an image intensifier. And it's ghostly green, and he said, oh yeah, that's going to look great. So we had to fit that onto the end of a Super 16 Arriflex film camera, which Philip Bonham Carter had to set up and get the focal length right, and did an amazing job on that. And I chose all the actual units we used because I knew what to look for. Because they could get burnt out very quickly if you shone light into them, bright light. And we didn't want the pixelating. I wanted it as clean as possible. There is still, if you watch it, there's still a little bit of pixelating because they're all units. But that's what we used. And in the night shoots, Alan never saw anything because it was pitch black. So the only person who saw anything was Philip Bonham Carter.
I know that also in post, part of that whole realism thing was getting the sounds correct as well. And I know you worked through with Alan into post-production as well, and assisted with that.
All the way through. I was literally with Alan all the way through, every single day of the movie, from right at the beginning to the time we finished editing and we showed the film to Peter Goodchild in the editing room. And so yeah, you got to get the sounds right, because obviously we're using guns on the location with blanks and they sound different. So we had to double the gun sounds on, including the distances, so that you got the sound of what it sounds like close up, what it sounds like from a distance, and so on, and the timing of the gunshots timed with the special effects splats on the concrete trough that was blown apart, and trees and the glass window and so on. So yeah, there was a lot of sound effects that I worked with the sound editor to get right.
So how long was the shooting time until you actually produced it? It was a fairly short time.
Yeah, we had to get going immediately. We only had about a month or 6 weeks to literally get the screenplay written and go through rehearsals in Ealing in London with the actors, cast it, go through rehearsals with the actors, talk to Bonham Carter, talk about the whole process with the crew and sort of how we were going to do it, and get out on, choose locations, which I was on. I chose locations. A location manager went out and selected a whole bunch of locations, and I went out and said, no, that's not right, yes, this is right, and that's great, this is great, and so on. Which is what Alan wanted, because he hadn't been in South Armagh, he didn't know what it was like. And we shot in Wales, so we had to get all that done. We had to get all that pre-production done in a very short space of time. Then we had about a 3-week shoot. And then we were back into the editing room and rooms to get it ready by December, so it would be ready to get aired.
So tell me, what was it like working with Alan in that? What was he like as a director that made him so special, you think?
One, he never thought that he'd got it right. He was always looking to tweak it, and he said to me often, he said, I'm never satisfied. I'm going to keep working on it. I'm going to keep playing with it until the day they take the editing bench away from me, and they'll literally have to tear it from my grasping hands. Because he was never satisfied. He was never satisfied at all. And, and he always thought he was learning. He always asked people on the set. He would say, after a take, he would say, well, what did you think of that one? And if we did 2 or 3 more, he would say, well, which one did you think was the best? And he would ask everybody, the runner, the lighting guys, everybody. So he was all inclusive. He'd ask the actors how they felt about it, because he wanted that collaboration from everybody to make the film. I mean, he was the captain in charge, he was the director, but he wanted all this input because he used all this input.
So really, his early passing was quite a tragedy, because I know that you then went to the States and worked with him and saw him progress during that time as well. So that must have been very difficult.
It was. I mean, it was great. It was one of these high-low things. We had been working on a couple of other projects with the BBC, which didn't happen. They were highly controversial, and they just went, "Oh, guys, we've been through enough with content. We don't want to go down this route again." And he had got a call from a producer in the States who'd seen Contact, because we at the end of '85 we won the Golden Leopard's Eye at the Locarno Film Festival for Best TV Film, and so that came to attention, and so this producer called in and said, "Alan, I want you to come over to the States and make a movie." Probably about a $3 to $6 million budget, which wasn't that huge, but it was a big movie. And he said, "Yeah, I'll come, I'll do it, we'll talk about it, but I will only come if I can bring my writer with me." So I was his pet writer at that point. So that's how I ended up in the States working with Alan on a big movie that we had funded by Hemdale.
So what was his time like there in terms of his progression as a director?
Well, he always wanted to do a big movie, a Hollywood movie, but he never thought that he was ready. And he said to me one day, I mean, it was very funny. I'll give you a little anecdote of what Alan was like. I walked into his hotel room one morning working on a screenplay, and he's lying on the bed, and he's got DVDs everywhere, and they're the crappiest films you've ever seen in your entire life. The sort of Martian women, blah blah, all this sort of stuff. And I said, "What are you watching this nonsense for?" He said, "Because I feel great when I watch it. I feel I'm really good." So it just reminds me how good I am. And then we were over breakfast that same day. He said, "I finally know how to make a movie," which I thought was really interesting, because he had been making films for decades. And he said, I finally know how to make a big, good, great movie. And I think that was the tragedy, because pretty soon after we were into casting, we were well into pre-production, we had all the funding in place, and we were casting the movie when he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And that was tragic, absolutely tragic, that somebody who knew in himself that now he was ready to make the ultimate, what he always wanted to do, and that never happened. So at the end of 89, he went back to England and died 6 months later. It was tragic, absolutely tragic.
So I suppose for you, doing this new edition of Contact, in that it's still the old film but being brought out in a new medium with DVD and BluRay and all of that, doing that and having contact with Alan's daughter and family must somehow feel like leaving a legacy or a tribute to him in some way. How does that feel now, so many years later?
It's really great. I mean, Molly, Alan's daughter Molly, has really done a great job. She's got it out into film festivals, and that's how I contacted her, or she contacted me, because she was working on getting Contact out into film festivals around Europe and so on over the years. And I own all the rights. I own the underlying rights to the screenplay. I own the film, the book rights, obviously. So all the underlying rights I own. And so I was the one that had to sign off on it. And so she contacted me and so on. And then she had been talking to the British Film Institute about this as well. And another guy called David Rawlinson, who's a professor at Stirling University who does film studies and stuff. And he'd been talking, saying this would be great to be a DVD. You need to get it out because it's such a great piece of art. It's a great, art film in that sense. I mean, it's stunning in all sorts of ways, but artistically and technically, it's also, given that it was made 32 years ago, is quite extraordinary, and set the standard for a lot of different films that followed. So I think that's wonderful, and I think that's great. Alan would be so proud of both. I mean, I know he was when he was alive, of both son Gabriel, who's a journalist, sportscaster, and Molly, who's those are the love of his life. Film came second, and then of course Everton, his fabled football team, which I used to kid him about all the time, because my grandfather was a great Everton supporter. And my grandfather was born in Liverpool, as was Alan, and we have the same last name. So we had a lot of contextual kind of weird things going on between us, but we had a connection, strong connection.
Well, I'm glad that this film can finally be brought into a modern form of technology, and that hopefully Alan Clarke is looking down and having a chuckle.
I'm sure he is. I'm sure he's looking, actually. If he believed in all that stuff and he was down there looking at me now, he'd be going, Taran, that's a load of crap,
Well, thank you very much for all of the insightful comments and just a bit of history about how this film got made, and the comments about Alan Clarke, and knowing how he worked on this and how you collaborated on this, which is quite special.
Yep, it's a special experience, and I'm glad that I've done it, and I'm glad that I was asked to do this.